If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, because tonight's story is not for the faint-hearted. This is a real-life nightmare, a story of a man who slipped through the cracks of justice, and for 6 long days, no one knew where he was. The night was cold and wet in London, the kind of night where the rain doesn't fall hard. It just hangs in the air like a mist crawling over your skin. A woman crossing the street near Finsbury Park glanced over her shoulder. She had that strange feeling, the kind you get when you know someone's watching you. And she was right. From across the street, a man stood half-hidden beneath a flickering streetlight. His hood was pulled low, his eyes restless. His name was Brahim Kaddour-Cherif, an Algerian national, a convicted sex offender, and a man who wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be behind bars. Yet somehow, impossibly, he wasn't. He watched her pass, his breath fogging in the cold night. A police siren wailed in the distance, and for a moment, he froze. Then he slipped into the darkness, vanishing down a narrow alley. What no one knew, not even the police, was that Brahim had walked free from one of Britain's most secure prisons by mistake. A clerical error, a single wrong click, and just like that, a registered sex offender was out on the streets again. But the strangest part? The prison didn't even notice he was gone. Not for a day. Not for 2 days. For 6 whole days, no one realized that Brahim Kaddour-Cherif had disappeared. And by the time they did, he was already miles away. The news would later call it one of the biggest blunders in modern prison history. But on that first night of freedom, Brahim wasn't thinking about headlines or justice. He was thinking about survival. He had no phone, no money, and no one to trust. The only thing he had left was fear and the will to disappear again. But this wasn't the first time Brahim had run. Months earlier, he had been arrested for flashing a young woman on a busy London street. It wasn't his first crime, and it wouldn't be his last. People in his old neighborhood remembered him, a quiet man who smiled too easily, who watched people too long. When the police caught him with a knife weeks later, they thought that was it, prison in a story. But the system that caught him was the same system that would let him go. And when that mistake happened, when a prison officer ticked the wrong box and opened that gate, Brahim didn't hesitate. He stepped out, eyes wide, heart racing. The heavy doors slammed shut behind him, and the London air hit his face like freedom. He didn't look back. Not once. For the next few days, he moved like a ghost, sleeping under bridges, blending into crowds, using fake names when people asked who he was. Police had no clue. The world didn't even know he was gone. And each passing day, he grew bolder. But freedom can be dangerous for a man like Brahim. It feeds the very thing that made him dangerous in the first place. And on the 6th night, when the city finally began to notice, Brahim made a decision that would change everything. That night, just past midnight, a call came into the London Metropolitan Police. A woman's trembling voice whispered, "I think I just saw him near Finsbury Park." Officers raced to the scene. Streets were cordoned off. Helicopters roared overhead. The manhunt had begun. But when they reached the alley where she said she'd seen him, there was no one there. Only a shadow and a small, folded piece of paper left behind. On it were 3 words, written in shaky English. "You can't find me." And that's when everything changed. Because what they didn't know, not yet, was that Brahim was watching them. From the rooftop just above, in the rain, with a stolen coat and a smirk on his face. He wasn't running anymore. He was waiting. The rain had stopped, but the city still smelled like it. Cold, wet pavement and diesel fumes drifting through the night. London was half asleep, unaware that one of the country's most wanted men was perched above it, hidden in plain sight. Brahim crouched on the rooftop, peering down at the flashing blue lights below. The police were everywhere, their radios crackling, their boots splashing in puddles. He could see them shouting orders, pointing flashlights into alleyways, checking doors. But none of them looked up. None of them ever looked up. He smiled. In that moment, he felt untouchable. But inside his chest, his heart was racing. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp for 6 days was beginning to fade. He hadn't eaten properly. He hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. Every sound, every siren, every car horn made him flinch. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. He needed to move. Brahim climbed down the back of the building, using an old drain pipe slick with rain. He landed quietly, adjusted his stolen coat, and slipped into the crowd of night workers heading toward the bus stop. Nobody noticed him. To them, he was just another tired man trying to get home. As he boarded the bus, he picked the seat near the back, always near the exit. Through the foggy window, he watched the city blur past. Neon lights, closed shops, and the faint reflection of his own face staring back. He barely recognized himself anymore. The headlines on a nearby passenger's phone caught his eye. Dangerous prisoner released by mistake. Manhunt underway. His picture was right there. Grainy, but clear enough. He gritted his teeth. The whole city was looking for him now. Every camera, every news channel, every social media feed. But Brahim was used to disappearing. He'd done it before, back when he'd overstayed his visa and lived off the grid for years. He still knew where to go. There was a small flat near Finsbury Park, a place he'd once shared with a man named Michael, an old acquaintance from his early days in London. Michael worked late-night shifts at a car wash and didn't ask questions. Brahim knew he might still be there. And if he was, he'd have food, maybe even cash. But when he reached the building, the lights were off. The windows were dark. He knocked once, twice, silence. Then the door creaked open. It wasn't Michael who answered. It was a woman, maybe in her 30s, pale-faced and tired, clutching a robe around her shoulders. She looked confused and scared. "Who are you?" she asked. Brahim froze. His mind raced. I'm looking for Michael. He used to live here," he said, forcing a weak smile. The woman shook her head. "He moved out months ago. Who are you again?" Her voice carried suspicion now. She was studying him, his clothes, his accent, the way his eyes darted. Then her expression changed. She looked closer. "You," she whispered, her eyes widening. "You're that guy on the news." Brahim's pulse exploded. "No," he said quickly, backing away. "You're mistaken." But it was too late. She was already reaching for her phone. He grabbed her wrist, not hard but firm enough to stop her. "Please," he said, his voice trembling. "Don't. I just need somewhere to sleep. Just tonight. Please." Tears welled in her eyes. "Get out of my house." And that's when the sound came, distant but growing. The faint echo of sirens, cutting through the night. Brahim's head snapped toward the window. He could see blue lights reflecting off the glass. The police were getting closer. He let go of the woman and bolted down the stairs, crashing through the back door into the alley. His breath came in sharp bursts as he ran through the maze of narrow streets, his shoes slapping against the wet concrete. He could hear the shouts now. Officers yelling, radios buzzing. They were closing in. He turned a corner and froze. A beam of light hit his face. A police officer stood just yards away, hand on his radio, eyes locked on him. For a second, neither of them moved. The officer's hand went to his belt. Brahim's heart hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. Then, like lightning, Brahim turned and sprinted the other way. "Stop!" the officer shouted, racing after him. Down one street, across another. Brahim's lungs burned, his vision blurred. But fear kept him moving. He knew if they caught him this time, he wasn't getting out again. He darted into a construction site, climbed a fence, and vanished into the darkness beyond. The officer stopped at the fence, breathing hard, radioing backup. "He's on the move again," the officer panted. "Suspect heading north." "Repeat, suspect heading north." But by the time more units arrived, Brahim was gone. Again, hiding behind a pile of scaffolding, soaked in sweat and rain, he listened to the sirens fade. He pressed his back against the cold metal and let out a shaky laugh. He'd escaped for now, but deep down he knew it couldn't last. The city was closing in, and his face was everywhere. Still, as he wiped the rain from his face, he whispered to himself, "They can't catch what they can't see." And then, somewhere in the distance, a shadow moved. It wasn't a police officer this time. It was someone else watching him. The night swallowed every sound except the faint hum of the rain dripping from a broken pipe above. Brahim crouched behind the scaffolding, chest heaving, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. That shadow, it wasn't a trick of his imagination. He was sure of it. Someone had been standing across the street, watching him. Not the police. Not anyone in uniform. just still, watching. He peered through a gap in the metal bars, but the alley was empty now. Just the echo of distant sirens and the wind brushing through paper cups and old newspapers. He waited, counting his breaths. 1 minute, 2 minutes, nothing. Finally, he stepped out. The streets of North London were nearly silent. A single streetlight buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds like it couldn't decide whether to die or not. He tightened the collar of his coat and started walking. His shoes squelched in puddles as he moved along the narrow path toward the edge of Finsbury Park. His thoughts raced. He can't stay here. He needs to disappear. Again, Brahim had survived worse. Back in Algeria, he'd lived in abandoned buildings, learned how to hide in plain sight. When he first came to London in 2019, he'd thought he'd found freedom, but it had turned into something else. The small crimes, the flashing incident, the arrests, the faces of the people who looked at him like he was a monster. Maybe they were right. He pushed the thought away and focused on surviving the night. He found an old storage yard behind a gas station, climbed through a hole in the fence, and curled up behind a stack of cardboard boxes. The smell of petrol hung heavy in the air, but at least it was dry. He closed his eyes, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. Sleep came in bursts, short, uneasy, haunted by flashing lights and screaming voices. Then a noise. Footsteps. Slow, crunching on gravel. He froze. His breath hitched. Someone was here. The sound got closer. A beam of light swept across the boxes. 1, 2, 3 passes before it stopped right where he was hiding. Brahim Kaddour-Cherif, a voice said. Deep, calm. You've had your fun. Brahim's heart stopped. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The voice didn't sound like police. There was no radio, no backup noise. Just one man. Alone. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see a figure standing under the light. A tall man in a black coat, face hidden beneath a hood. He wasn't holding a gun or a badge, just a flashlight. Brahim swallowed. Who are you? The man tilted his head. Someone who doesn't make mistakes. That sentence sent a chill through Brahim's spine. The man took a slow step forward, the gravel crunching under his boots. You've embarrassed a lot of people, Brahim. The kind of people who don't like embarrassment. Brahim scrambled to his feet, panic taking over. I didn't do anything. It was the prison's fault, he shouted. The man's voice was calm. Too calm. Maybe. But it's your face on every screen. And someone has to take the blame. He raised his flashlight higher. And for the first time, Brahim saw something glinting in the man's other hand. A knife. Not a small one, either. Brahim backed away, his shoulder hitting the cold metal fence behind him. Look, I don't want trouble. Too late for that, the man said, stepping closer. They want this cleaned up quietly. No trial. No headlines. Just gone. Brahim's breathing turned frantic. His mind raced. He looked to the side, the fence. The same hole he'd crawled through earlier. If he could just make it back out. The man lunged. Brahim ducked just in time. The blade slashed across the cardboard, tearing it open. Brahim stumbled backward, kicked over a metal bin, and ran. Stop! The man roared, chasing him through the yard. Brahim sprinted toward the fence, scraping his hands as he dove through the hole. His coat tore, but he didn't care. He tumbled out onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. He didn't look back. He ran, through streets, past shuttered shops, across the empty road, until his lungs felt like fire. Only when he reached a small underpass did he finally stop, collapsing against a wall. The city was silent again. No footsteps this time. No voice. He was alone. Or at least, he thought he was. He reached into his coat pocket to steady his shaking hands, and that's when he felt something he didn't recognize. A small folded paper. He opened it slowly. 3 words stared back at him. Still can't find me. His eyes widened. His stomach turned cold. That wasn't the note he left before. This one was new. Someone had been inside his coat. Brahim's voice broke in the dark. What do you want from me? But no one answered. Only the sound of the wind, and the faint echo of footsteps fading once more into the London night. The morning light crept through the gray London fog, turning the city's skyline into a blur of glass and smoke. Brahim sat under the bridge, his face pale, his body shaking from cold and fear. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. That note was still in his hand, crumpled now, wet from the rain, but the words burned in his mind like fire. Still can't find me? Who wrote it? How did it get into his pocket? The man in the coat? The police? Or someone else entirely? Brahim's head pounded. He tried to convince himself he was imagining things, that exhaustion was playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew this was real. Someone was tracking him, someone who knew where he was, what he'd done, and maybe even what he was thinking. He pushed himself to his feet and staggered out from the underpass. The city was waking up. Cars hummed, buses hissed to a stop, people hurried past with coffee cups and umbrellas. No one looked at him. No one cared. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. He needed help, food, warmth, a place to think. There was one person left he thought might still owe him a favor. A man named Eddie, who worked at a scrapyard on the south side of the city. They'd met months ago inside Wandsworth Prison. Eddie was a small-time thief, but smart. He'd once promised Brahim that if either of them ever got out, he'd find a way to make things right. Well, this was the time to cash in that promise. Brahim made his way through the crowded streets, hiding his face behind a scarf he'd stolen from a bus stop bench. He took the long way, avoiding main roads, CCTV cameras, and anywhere with police vans. Every siren made him jump. Every glance made him flinch. By noon, he reached the edge of the scrapyard, a maze of crushed cars and rusted machines surrounded by a wire fence. He slipped through the gate, and the familiar smell of oil and metal filled his nose. "Eddie," he called softly. "It's me, Brahim." For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice answered from behind a stack of tires. "Brahim? Holy hell, man." Eddie stepped out, wiping grease off his hands. His face was thin, older than Brahim remembered, but his eyes were sharp. "You're all over the news. They said you escaped." "I didn't escape," Brahim hissed. "They let me out. By mistake." Eddie shook his head, almost laughing. "Ain't that something? You always did have the devil's luck." But Brahim didn't smile. "I need a place to hide. Just for a day. Please." Eddie studied him for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Come on. There's a container at the back. No one goes there." He led Brahim through the maze of wrecked vehicles to an old shipping container sitting half-sunk in the mud. Inside, there was a small mattress, some tools, and a space heater that barely worked. Brahim sat down, finally letting out a deep breath. "You're safe here," Eddie said. "For now." "Eddie," Brahim started, his voice low. "Someone's after me. Not the police, someone else. A man in black. He found me last night. Left a note in my coat." Eddie frowned. "What kind of note?" Brahim pulled it out and handed it to him. Eddie read it, his expression darkening. "This ain't good," he muttered. "Sounds like someone wants you gone, man. Real gone." "Who?" Brahim asked desperately. "Who'd go through all this trouble?" Eddie didn't answer right away. He looked out through the container door, scanning the yard. "You made enemies, Brahim. Maybe inside prison. Maybe out here. But whoever this is, they ain't doing it for fun." He turned back. "I'll get you some food. Stay here. Don't move." Brahim nodded, hugging his knees as Eddie left. The silence crept back in. The hum of the city faded. He stared at the rusty metal walls, his mind spinning. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Then a sound. A soft click. It came from outside the container. Brahim froze. "Eddie," he whispered. No answer. Another click, this time closer, like a latch being turned. "Eddie, is that you?" he said again, louder now. Nothing. Then the sound of footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. Brahim's heart raced. He scrambled to his feet, backing against the far wall. His eyes darted around for something. Anything to defend himself. His hand closed around a rusted wrench. The container door creaked open. A shadow fell across the floor. And then, "Police! Don't move!" Two armed officers burst in, flashlights blinding him. Brahim raised his hands instantly, dropping the wrench with a clang. But as he stood there, trembling, he noticed something. Behind the officers, outside the container, beyond the flashing blue lights, stood a familiar shape. A man in a black coat, watching. Their eyes met for a split second before the officers pulled Brahim to the ground and cuffed his hands behind his back. "Got him!" one of them shouted into his radio. But Brahim wasn't hearing them anymore. He twisted his neck, trying to see through the light. The man in black was still there, smiling faintly. And just as they dragged Brahim out of the container, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd. The flashing blue lights painted the scrapyard like a broken disco. Harsh, spinning, dizzying. Officers shouted over the noise, their boots crunching against gravel as Brahim was shoved into the back of a police van. The door slammed shut behind him with a metallic clang. For the first time in days, he wasn't running. But that didn't mean he felt safe. Through the small wire window, he could still see the scrapyard. And for a brief second, he swore he saw that same man in black watching from the shadows. Calm, still, almost proud. Then the van pulled away, and the figure vanished. Brahim leaned his head against the cold wall of the van, his wrists burning from the cuffs. His thoughts were chaos. The relief of being caught mixed with a darker fear that whoever was after him might not be finished yet. Inside, two officers sat opposite him, silent and focused. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, finally broke the silence. "You know how much trouble you caused, Kaddour-Cherif?" he said. 6 days on the run. Whole city looking for you." Brahim lifted his head. "It wasn't my fault," he muttered. "They released me. I didn't escape." The other officer scoffed. "You think anyone's going to care about that? You were a registered sex offender, a known criminal. You vanished. That's all people need to hear." Brahim clenched his jaw. "Someone was following me. A man. Save it for the detectives," the officer snapped. "You've got a long night ahead of you." The van turned sharply, the lights outside flickering as they entered the narrow streets near the police headquarters. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier. When the van finally stopped, they yanked open the back doors. Brahim stepped out, blinking against the light. Cameras flashed instantly, reporters shouting his name, microphones waving. "Brahim, did you escape on purpose? Are you working with anyone? Why did they let you out?" The officers pulled him through the crowd. Brahim kept his eyes down. He felt like every lens, every camera flash was cutting into his skin. He wanted to scream that it wasn't his fault, that he wasn't the villain they thought he was. But his voice stayed trapped in his throat. Inside the station, the air smelled of coffee, wet jackets, and tired cops. They led him to a small, gray interrogation room. A single table, 2 chairs, 1 camera blinking red in the corner. A woman in a dark suit entered moments later. Her voice was steady, professional but cold. "Mr. Kaddour-Cherif, I'm Detective Laura Mason. We've been looking for you." Brahim's hand shook. "You found me," he said quietly. "But there's someone else out there." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Someone else?" "Yes, a man in black. He found me at a gas station. He tried to kill me. Then he followed me to the scrapyard." The detective exchanged a quick glance with the officer beside her. "And you have proof of this?" Brahim leaned forward. "He left a note in my coat. Check my pocket. It's there." The officer reached into the evidence bag that held his belongings and unfolded the wet, crumpled paper. The words were still visible. "Still can't find me?" Laura read it silently, her brow furrowing. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "What did you say you got this?" "Last night," Brahim said quickly. "He was there, I swear." The detective held up a hand to stop him. "Mr. Kaddour-Cherif, this note wasn't found on you when you were arrested." Brahim froze. "What?" "It was found inside the police van after you were taken out," she said slowly. "Someone slipped it in during the transport." The air in the room turned heavy. Even the officer beside her went pale. "That means he's still out there," Brahim whispered. Laura stared at him for a moment, then stood up. "I'll need to make a call." She stepped out of the room, leaving Brahim alone under the humming fluorescent light. He sat there, trembling, staring at the mirrored glass across from him, knowing someone was on the other side, watching. But the worst part? He didn't know who anymore. Minutes passed, maybe more. The hum of the light seemed louder now, like static in his ears. Then, click, the light above him flickered once, twice, and went out. The room went completely dark. Brahim's breath caught in his throat. "Hello," he called. "Hey." The light. No answer. He stood, his hand brushing the metal table. His heartbeat thundered in the silence. Then, from the darkness, came a faint sound, a low, drawn-out whisper. "Still can't find me." Brahim's blood ran cold. He spun toward the sound, but there was nothing there, just the darkness pressing in on him. And then the lights flicked back on. The room was empty again, the door locked. Brahim was alone. He collapsed back into the chair, shaking uncontrollably. Tears filled his eyes as he stared at the mirrored glass. "Please," he whispered, "make it stop." But on the other side of that glass, someone was smiling. The night that followed would be one the city would never forget. The police station was a frenzy of motion, officers running back and forth, phones ringing nonstop, and reporters crowding outside the glass doors. Everyone wanted answers. But inside the gray interrogation room, Brahim Kaddour-Cherif sat still, his head bowed, his eyes blank. Detective Laura Mason re-entered, a folder tucked under her arm. Her face was pale. She'd just come from a call with the security division. She closed the door behind her, locked it, and leaned against the wall. "Brahim," she began softly. "We pulled the footage from a van." He looked up, his eyes red. "And—" Laura hesitated before sliding a photo across the table. It showed the inside of the van, minutes before his arrival at the station. The timestamp glowed on the corner of the screen. There, sitting in the back corner, was a blurred figure. A man dressed in black. But here's the thing. The van had been empty the entire trip, except for the officers and Brahim. No one else had entered or exited. "We checked every frame," Laura whispered. "This image appears for only 1 second, right before the cameras cut out. Then nothing." Brahim's voice trembled. "So he's real." Laura nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe someone wants us to believe that." Before Brahim could answer, a loud crash echoed down the hallway. Glass shattered. Shouts followed. The power flickered again. First the lights, then the security monitors. Laura drew her gun instantly. "Stay here," she shouted as she opened the door. "Wait," Brahim called out, but she was already gone. He sat there in the half-dark, heart pounding, every second stretching like a lifetime. Then, from the corner of the room, came a faint creak. The air vent above the table shifted. Brahim's eyes widened. He stared at the vent, frozen. Then, slowly, a gloved hand slid out from the opening, followed by another. The man in black dropped silently to the floor. His mask caught the dim light. No face, no eyes, just black fabric. Brahim stumbled backward, the chair clattering to the ground. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The figure didn't answer. He stepped forward, calm, deliberate. Brahim pressed against the wall, shaking. "I did what you wanted. I disappeared. You can't." The man tilted his head, then whispered the same chilling words again. "Still can't find me." He raised a small object, a folded note, and placed it on the table. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. The vent above swung back into place, silent. Moments later, the lights came fully back on. Officers burst in with guns drawn. Laura followed, her voice sharp and desperate. "Where is he?" Brahim pointed at the table, speechless. The note was still there. She grabbed it, unfolded it, and froze. It read, "He wasn't the monster you thought he was. I am." The room went silent. Everyone stared at the note, their expressions turning from confusion to fear. Brahim collapsed into the chair, sobbing. You see now," he cried. "He's been watching all along." Detective Laura looked up at the vent, then back at Brahim. But before she could say anything, one of the officers rushed in. "Detective, you need to see this. The security feed just came back online, and—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "The body cam footage from the van driver, it's gone. All of it. Completely wiped." Laura's face went white. Outside, the storm had started again, thunder rolling through the city, drowning the world in rain. And somewhere, watching from the shadows, the man in black smiled to himself, as if the game had only just begun. Brahim Kaddour-Cherif would never be seen alive again. If you made it this far, you're part of the story now. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because there's more darkness waiting to be uncovered, and the next mystery might be closer than you think. Turn on that bell. You won't want to miss what happens next.